There he comes. Hey, Chris. Now is your time to get some freak answers from these people. I was going to ask maybe if we add Gary Queen up here. Gary, you want to come up? Gary's bank director. Come on, Gary. You can come up here. Come on.
I don't have any answers. I just got questions.
Yeah, well, he's been out to negotiate. Come on up here and sit down. So, and also, there's a young fellow that plays hockey. He's over 50, but he still plays hockey, and he's a Canadian, and he's a receiver, and he represents some foreign German money. And would you please get your puck up here, Richard? You get your puck up here, because Richard is also, Richard and Gary can add some dimension to the group up here. So just fire away your questions. They said they'll stay as long as you got questions. And if you don't have questions, they'll be looking for answers. So Gary, is there a chair there? It's Richard and Chris. Just holler at anybody you want. Raise, go ahead. Just in the back. David?
My question is for the attorney, Christopher Voss. In the bankruptcy proceedings, is there any consideration given in value in these appraisals that are done to a stigma on property that is offered for sale through bankruptcy?
Well, I guess it's who's looking at the valuation. So, I mean, when a property enters bankruptcy, and let's just say the person owns it in their name. The property, the borrower owns it in their name. The property is then assessed preliminarily to see if there's any equity. Because if there is equity, the trustee is going to take possession of the property and liquidate it for the benefit of the creditors.
In order to establish that equity, though, and my question is, there must be an appraisal done.
There is, and so the trustee will will hire an appraisal.
When that appraisal comes in, does that appraisal look at the comparable sales and then make an application for a stigma value of being involved in a bankruptcy? Well, or do they just use a, you know, if you've got a piece of property that's being sold as a result of these kind of actions, no one's going to pay dollar for dollar.
That's a pretty good point. So what you're going to find is that the trustee is going to look at it from a time value situation. So however you want to comp it, the trustee says, I don't care. If I was able to sell it right now at a bankruptcy auction, would somebody buy it? And the appraiser is going to say, no way, it's $200,000 underwater. And so the trustee is going to indicate to the court and say that they are going to allow the bank to foreclose out its interest, and it's called a relief from stay. And so the federal court is going to remove its protection over that property, and then it becomes the bank's. And I think what's confusing for many folks in bankruptcy is that if the trustee is not interested in it and the client's not trying to keep it, there is still a foreclosure. And so the only way the bank's going to get title is to foreclose. Now, interestingly enough, in several of our bankruptcies recently, the bank has come forth and asked the client on a good faith basis to work with them and continue to short sell it on the back end of the bankruptcy so that it doesn't get the stigma of a bank-owned property. So the bank realizes that, and what may be telling to a lot of folks in this room, is that it's kind of an alarming question when the bank's attorney calls me and says, hey, listen, would your client, even though you've bankrupted it and owe no obligation to it, on a good faith basis, would your client leave it in their name so we don't foreclose it out and work with us on a short sale, for example? And you're starting to see a lot of that. Rarely right now are you seeing anything that is sold by the trustee, and it's because there's no equity.
So your answer would be there is a stigma associated with bank-owned property coming out of these types of actions.
The bank believes that there's a stigma, yes.
Do you have any idea, would you associate a percentage to that, 10%, 20%, 30%?
The bank's going to look at it on a property by property basis, I think. So, but I think I don't know if you could say what percentage of property would be stigmatized as being bank owned. So the bigger question is whether or not there's a bankruptcy. The stigma is on bank owned property.
And that's really my main question.
Yeah. Sorry, I answered pretty much everything but that, I think.
Questions? Next, who's next? You're back here in the back.
I have a question for Dell on the Colonial Bank and BB&T taking it over. You were able to, were you able to determine the loss allocation that was put on the property, or did you just negotiate as far as the approximately a 45% discount? Or I think that's approximately what you got, right?
Well, actually, I didn't negotiate that deal. Just one of my best friends was involved with it. But basically, my friends actually knew of Vista Equity and actually contacted them themselves. And they were able to come in working. They worked with BB&T and the borrowers and Vista to arrive at the ultimate sales price, and which, like I said, was $5.5 million. But and what I didn't say about that is, I said it's the best thing that happened if the bank goes under and goes to another bank, because the FDIC is stopgapping the losses. I mean, that loan's already been written down, right? I mean, the loan's written, it's worth X. It's already been written down to that. And so that's what BB&T would be carrying it on their books for. And so it's, in some cases they could actually make money, because FDIC stopped gapping the losses to the bank that's acquiring the assets of the failed bank. So that's why this guy they were able to negotiate such a large discount.
I'd like to follow up the question with Mr. Boss, whether or not he's had any experience as far as being able to ascertain what the loan has been written down to as a result of an FDIC brokered transaction.
Well, the stop loss provisions are available on the Fed's website. So if you ever can't fall asleep, you can read stop loss provisions. One of the confusing parts about that, and we're neck deep in it right now with Riverside Bank, which is now the product of TD Bank, which is Canadian, and AmTrust, which is Community Bank in New York. Now AmTrust was a substantially larger deal, but there's two moving parts there, and you can compare an FDIC takeover to kind of trading in a car. I mean, you don't know where they're getting you coming or going, because there's also a basis issue. So there's stop loss and then there's basis. And what's difficult to ascertain is the new bank's basis. You can read about where loss is going to be shared, and what limit will be capped upon the acquiring bank, and what's going to be picked up by the Fed, or by the FDIC. The other issue is whether or not the note even survived. So one of the best parts, and the deals are getting not nearly as bountiful as they were, but 2 years ago, banks used to come into a Riverside National Bank and cherry pick loans, performing and non-performing. And everything that was non-performing never hit the books of a BB&T or a TD Bank. It goes off and gets bundled and sold to what's the company that's been Condor Capital. They've made some money in buying up some FDIC spin-off stuff, and it's hard to ascertain. You can gather where the stop loss is, but you can't always figure out where the basis is, which is where, as Dell said, they can make some money.